You have found your way here, to this quiet place where the dust of millennia settles upon the remains of what was once spoken and what was once felt. There is a stillness in your presence, a recognition that the noise of the world outside has no weight within these walls. You are here because the echoes of the first stories still vibrate in the marrow of the bone, seeking a witness. I reach now for a vessel of memory that has outlived the cities that birthed it. It is a collection of clay, heavy and fragile, bearing the indentations of a reed that pressed the first cries of the human soul into the wet earth. This is the Epic of Gilgamesh. It carries the scent of the first rains that ever washed the dust of the plains, and the heat of a sun that burned long before the names of modern nations were ever whispered. We do not open these tablets to seek a lesson or to map a history, but to stand as witnesses to the moment the species first realized its own shadow and its own end. The clay is cold, yet the story it holds is a fire that has never truly been extinguished. Let the doors of the archive close behind us, and let the walls of the first city rise from the red earth once more. The sun is a weight, a golden hammer striking the red earth of the plains where the two rivers coil like serpents through the dust. Here, where the mud was first shaped by the hand of the creature, stands Uruk, a mountain of brick and defiance. Look at these walls, for they are the first boundary drawn between the wild and the willed. They are thick, wide enough for armies to walk upon, and deep enough to bury the fears of a multitude. Each brick was baked in a fire that consumed the cedar and the scrub, and each layer of bitumen was laid with the sweat of 1,000 bodies, seeking to build something that the wind could not carry away. And at the heart of this hive of stone and ambition, there is a king who is not a king, but a storm. Gilgamesh. He is 2 parts of the celestial light and 1 part of the heavy, dark earth. In him, the blood of the eternal ones pulses with the frantic, terminal rhythm of the mortal heart. He is a man who is too large for the world he inhabits, his spirit a tide that constantly beats against the shores of the possible. In the streets of Uruk, his shadow falls long and heavy over the homes of the weavers and the potters. He does not walk, he tramples. He does not lead, he consumes. There is a restlessness in his limbs, a fire in his chest that no woman can satisfy and no warrior can quench. For he is searching for a mirror in a world of shadows. He takes the sons from their fathers for his wars, and he takes the daughters from their mothers for his bed, not out of cruelty, but out of a hunger that comes from knowing, deep in the silence of his bones, that he is a creature that will one day stop. The people cry out, their voices rising like the smoke from the altars, drifting toward the silent heights where the architects of existence reside. They do not ask for a master, but for a balance. They ask for a soul that can stand against the sun without being withered by its heat, a force that can meet the storm of Gilgamesh and hold it in place. And so, from the primordial clay, from the same mud that lines the riverbanks and forms the walls of the city, a new shape is gathered. The great mother of the species dips her hands into the silt. She takes the wildness of the plains and the silence of the stones, and she molds Enkidu. He is born not in the cradle of the city, but in the vast, unwritten spaces where the gazelle runs and the lion waits. His body is covered in the hair of the beasts. His strength is the strength of the falling water, and his mind is as clear and as empty as the sky before the first dawn. He knows no language, no law, and no limit. He eats the grass with the herds, and he drinks from the water holes where the predators and the prey meet in a brief, shivering truce. He is the human before the word, the creature before the wall, the pure, unadulterated weight of nature itself. But the city and the wild cannot remain apart, for the city is only the wild that has been captured and taught to fear its own hunger. A hunter, a man whose life is the tracking of the unseen, sees the wild one at the waterhole and feels a terror that is older than his gods. He sees a man who is not a man, a being who breaks the traps and protects the herds, a being who undoes the work of the human hand. The hunter returns to the walls of Uruk, his heart a drumming rhythm of fear, and tells the king of the giant who walks with the beasts. Gilgamesh, the one who is 2/3 light and 1/3 dust, listens, and for the first time, the fire in his chest recognizes a flickering response from the horizon. He does not send an army to kill the wild one. He does not send a hunter to trap him. Instead, he sends the mystery of the human touch. He sends the woman, the one who carries the ancient knowledge of the threshold. She goes to the water hole, to the edge of the world, and she waits. For 6 days and 7 nights, the wildness of Enkidu is met by the depth of the human gaze. He learns the scent of the skin, the softness of the voice, and the weight of the breath that is shared between two bodies. And as he enters the world of the human, the world of the beast fades from his eyes. When he tries to run with the gazelles, his knees are heavy, and his breath is short. The animals turn away from him, for he no longer smells of the earth and the rain. He smells of the fire and the word. He is no longer a beast, but he is not yet a citizen. He is caught in the space between, a spirit waking up to its own loneliness. And in that loneliness, he hears the name of the one who is waiting for him behind the great walls of brick. He is led toward Uruk, toward the smell of baked bread and the sound of the many. He is taught to wear the cloth that binds the limbs and to drink the fermented grain that dulls the senses. He is being prepared not for a life of peace, but for the meeting that was written in the clay before the rivers found their path to the sea. The wild man and the king, the earth and the sun, the one who has everything and the one who has nothing. They are moving toward one another in the narrow streets of the city, while the people watch from the rooftops, holding their breath in the heavy, silent heat. The gates of the palace are near, and the shadow of the wall is long. The shadow breaks, not by the setting of the sun, but by the collision of two worlds that were never meant to touch, yet could not remain apart. At the threshold of the marital chamber, where the king intended to claim what he believed was his by right of strength, the wild one stands as a pillar of living earth. There is no speech between them, no protocol of kings or greeting of nomads. For when the deep calls to the deep, the tongue is a useless instrument. There is only the sudden, violent geometry of bone meeting bone, the sound of a mountain cracking under its own weight. They grapple in the doorway, their breathing a rhythmic labor that mirrors the grinding of tectonic plates. The bricks of Uruk, so carefully laid, tremble beneath the force of their heels. Dust rises from the mortar, a fine red powder that coats their skin until they are the color of the primordial clay from which they both were summoned. Gilgamesh, the two-thirds divine, finds for the first time that his strength has an end. He finds a wall that does not crumble, a force that does not yield. Enkidu, the child of the plains, finds a heat that does not consume, a spirit that possesses the same restless, devouring fire as his own. They are two storms locked in a single room, a whirlwind of muscle and intent that spills out into the streets under the indifferent gaze of the stars. And then, as suddenly as the storm began, the air grows still. The king steps back, his chest heaving, the blood from his brow mixing with the sweat of the wild man. They look into each other's eyes, and in that reflection, the mirrors of their souls finally find a surface that is true. The loneliness that had sat like a cold stone in the center of Gilgamesh's heart for all his years begins to thaw, for he sees that he is no longer the only one of his kind. He is no longer a god among sheep. He is a man among brothers. The violence transforms, not into peace, but into a shared gravity. They embrace, and the city of Uruk, which had been a cage for one and a wonder for the other, becomes their shared dominion. But the heart of the seeker is never quiet for long. In the quiet nights that follow, as they sit upon the high ramparts of the city, Gilgamesh watches the smoke rise from the funeral pyres in the distance. He sees the bodies of the commoners being carried to the earth, and the realization of the end begins to gnaw at his spirit like a worm in the fruit. He turns to Enkidu, his voice a low vibration in the dark. "I have looked over the wall," he says, "and I have seen the bodies floating in the river, the old, the young, the strong, and the weak. They all become one with the silt. Who can climb to the heavens and live forever? Only the architects of the stars remain. But we are but a breath that passes through the reeds. It is here, in the shadow of this mortality, that the first great vanity of the species is born, the desire for the name. To be forgotten is to truly die, and so Gilgamesh proposes a journey into the heart of the forbidden, into the great Cedar Forest, where the breath of the world is thick with the scent of resin and ancient shadows. He seeks to fell the tallest trees, to bring back the timber that will build even greater gates for Uruk, and in doing so, to kill the guardian of the woods, the creature Humbaba, whose face is a forest of tangled vines, and whose voice is the deluge. Enkidu, who knows the secrets of the wild, feels a coldness enter his marrow. He remembers the warnings of the wind and the silence of the stones. "The forest is a pathless place," he whispers, "and the guardian is a force that cannot be bargained with. To enter is to invite the gaze of the void." But the king is driven by a hunger that is louder than fear. He calls for the smiths of Uruk. He orders the casting of axes so heavy that 10 men cannot lift them, and swords of bronze and silver that shine with the light of a dying sun. He seeks to arm his mortality against the eternal. They leave the city behind, walking away from the certainty of the brick and the comfort of the fire. The journey is a long unraveling of the world they knew. For days they march toward the mountains, where the sun retreats at night. The air grows thin and cold. The red earth gives way to gray stone, and the silence of the high places begins to weigh upon them. Each night they dig a well for the mountain spirits. They scatter the flour as an offering to the dreams that haunt the sleeper. Gilgamesh dreams of falling mountains, of fire that rains from the sky, of a great bull that breathes the dust of the earth. He wakes in a cold sweat, his hand reaching for the hilt of his blade, his eyes searching the dark for an enemy he cannot name. It is Enkidu who interprets the visions, turning the terror into a promise of victory, weaving the threads of the subconscious into a garment of courage. He acts as the anchor for the king's drifting spirit, yet his own heart heart grows heavier with every step they take toward the green wall of the forest. Finally, they stand at the edge of the world. The cedar forest rises before them, a mass of green so deep it is almost black. A living cathedral that has stood since the first rain fell upon the cooling crust of the earth. The scent of the resin is an intoxicating weight, a perfume of time itself. They see the track of the guardian, a path worn into the earth by the passing of a weight that no man was meant to witness. The trees are so tall they seem to support the belly of the sky, and their needles whisper secrets in a language that predates the first word ever spoken by a human tongue. The axes are gripped tight, the breath is held, and the first step is taken into the emerald gloom, where the light of the sun is filtered into a pale, ghostly silver. They are no longer in the realm of the city. They are in the belly of the old world, and the heart of the guardian is beginning to beat in rhythm with their own. The green silence is not an absence. It is a density, a weight of 1,000 years of unfallen rain, and the slow, rhythmic pulse of the sap rising through the veins of the earth. As they move deeper, the air loses the taste of the city, the smell of baked bread and the charred remains of burnt offerings, and takes on the cold, metallic tang of the beginning of the world. Every step is a transgression against a peace that has never known the foot of a man, and the forest knows. It feels the intrusion of the bronze and the frantic heat of the human heart. The shadows here do not flee from the light. They absorb it, turning the golden rays into a pale, ghostly silver that clings to the bark of the giants. And then the forest speaks. It is not a voice made of words, but a sound that shatters the very concept of silence. Umbaba, the guardian, emerges from the gloom, not as a beast to be hunted, but as a mountain that has decided to move. His face is a shifting nightmare of woven vines and ancient geometric scars. Eyes like the surface of a deep, sunless pool that reflects nothing but the void. His breath is the mist that hides the edge of the world, and his roar is the sound of a forest being uprooted by a storm. He is the law of the wild, the living wall that nature has built to protect its own heart from the hunger of the city. He is the terror that ensures the balance, the shadow that keeps the sun from burning the earth to a cinder. Gilgamesh feels the cold hand of the end brushing against his spine. His knees, which have never bowed to a mortal or a king, tremble under the weight of this primordial presence. He looks to Enkidu, and in the eyes of the wild man, he sees the same terror, but also a recognition. Enkidu knows this force. He has felt its weight in the long nights of his wandering among the herds, and he knows that to survive this moment, they must become something more than men. They must become the storm itself. The king's hand tightens around the hilt of the great axe, the metal slick with the sweat of his palms, and the first blow is struck. The clash is a slow, agonizing labor. The bronze axes strike against the hide of the guardian, and the sound is the ring of metal on stone, a spark of the new world trying to find purchase in the thick, ancient skin of the old. Humbaba strikes back with the force of falling timber, his limbs like the trunks of cedars, sweeping the earth and turning the ferns into a bloody pulp. The struggle is not a dance of warriors. It is a grinding of elemental energies, a chaotic unraveling of form and intent. The two heroes are tossed like leaves in a gale, their strength a flickering candle against the darkness of the Guardian's rage. But the sky is watching. The great eye of the sun, which Gilgamesh has invoked with his offerings of flower and his frantic prayers of fear, begins to stir in the heights. The elements, which usually stand apart from the squabbles of the dust-born, are drawn into the fray by the sheer audacity of the king's ambition. The winds are unleashed. The great wind, the north wind, the south wind, and the whirlwind. They descend upon the forest like invisible hounds, tearing at the mist and pinning the guardian against the very trees he was born to protect. Humbaba, the force of nature, is betrayed by the nature of the world. He is blinded by the dust of the plains and paralyzed by the breath of the heavens. The guardian falls, a mountain of scales and moss collapsing into the red earth with a sound that makes the birds flee for 100 leagues. He looks at Gilgamesh with eyes that have seen the birth of the rivers, and for a moment the roar becomes a whisper, a plea for the sanctity of the wild. "Let me live," the spirit of the woods breathes, his voice a rustle of dying leaves. "And I will be your servant. I will grow the trees for your palace, and the forest will be your garden." Gilgamesh hesitates. The 2/3 divine within him feels the weight of the life he is about to extinguish, the ancient connection between the king and the guardian of the world's breath. He sees the beauty in the terror, the necessity of the shadow. But Enkidu, the one who was once a part of this very wildness, is the one who urges the final blow. Perhaps it is because he knows that there is no going back, that once the threshold of the forest has been crossed, the city must either consume the wild or be consumed by it. "Finish it," he says, his voice like the grinding of pebbles in a mountain stream. "If you do not take the head of the guardian now, the name you seek will be written in the dust of your own grave before the moon rises. The gods will not forgive a deed left half done." The axe falls. The sound of the guardian's death is a crack that echoes across the mountains, a vibration that makes the distant, sun-baked walls of Uruk shudder. The head of Humbaba is severed, and with it, the soul of the forest is unanchored from the earth. The green light seems to fade into a dull morning gray. The air grows thin and hollow, and a profound aching silence descends upon the heights. The victory is complete, yet the air tastes of ash. They do not rest, for the hunger for the name is a master that knows no mercy. They turn their blades from the flesh of the guardian to the flesh of the earth. They begin to fell the cedars. The first tree to go is the greatest of them all, a pillar of the world that has stood since the gods were children. When it falls, the earth groans, a deep, resonant thud that shakes the roots of every living thing in the valley. They strip the bark, they clear the branches, and they prepare to float the giant timber down the rivers toward the city of brick. The forest is no longer a sanctuary. It is a quarry. The mystery has been turned into material. And as Gilgamesh stands over the fallen giants of wood, his hands stained with the blood of the guardian and the sap of the earth, he feels the cold sting of his own legend beginning to form. He has won the timber for his gates. He has earned a story that will be told as long as men have tongues. But in the silence of the wounded woods, a new shadow is gathering. It is the shadow of the law, the realization that every theft from the eternal must be paid for in the currency of the mortal heart. The rivers are waiting, and the gods are beginning to count the cost of the king's ambition. The journey back is a procession of shadows. The great cedar is now a raft, a silent giant bound by ropes of hemp, floating upon the currents of the river like a prisoner of war. The water, which once sang to the roots of the trees in the high places, now carries their corpses toward the city of brick and bitumen. Gilgamesh and Enkidu stand upon the timber, their bodies bronzed by the sun and hardened by the labor of the kill, watching the horizon where the towers of Uruk begin to pierce the shimmering heat. They return not as men, but as legends, carrying the spoils of a conquered world. And yet the air around them is thick with a silence that is not the silence of peace, but the silence of an indrawn breath before a scream. As they enter the gates, the city erupts in a fever of recognition. The women throw flower petals that are crushed beneath the weight of the cedar, and the men sing of the king who broke the heart of the forest. Gilgamesh washes the blood of Humbaba from his hair, allowing the water to carry the scent of the wild into the sewers of the city. He clothes himself in robes of fine linen, woven with threads of gold that catch the light like the surface of a mountain lake. He places the crown upon his brow, and for a moment he is the sun made flesh. He is the architect of a new order, a man who has looked into the eyes of the guardian and survived to tell the tale. But the heights of the human spirit are always mirrored by the depths of the celestial hunger. From the silver balconies of the heavens, the eye of the Great Mother, the one who embodies the devouring heat of desire and the cold sting of the morning star, falls upon the king. She is the one whose name is written in the movement of the tides and the cycle of the blood. She is Ishtar. She descends to the walls of Uruk, not as a spirit, but as a presence that makes the air taste of copper and perfume. She stands before Gilgamesh, her voice a melody that carries the weight of 1,000 fallen empires. "Come, Gilgamesh," she whispers, "be my husband. Let us weave our destinies together. I will give you a chariot of lapis lazuli and gold, with wheels of fire and demons for horses. I will bring the kings of the world to your feet, and the scent of the cedar will be but a memory compared to the fragrance of our union." Gilgamesh, flush with the victory of the forest, looks upon the Celestial One not with the awe of a worshipper, but with the cold, measuring eye of a witness. He knows the stories that are whispered in the dark corners of the taverns, the tales of those who have loved the star and been consumed by her light. He remembers the gardener turned into a toad, the stallion broken by the whip, the shepherd whose own dogs tore him to pieces. His heart, once a vessel for the divine, is now a fortress of human pride. He rejects the offer not with a prayer, but with an insult. He lists her betrayals as if he were reciting a ledger of debts. He calls her a door that lets in the storm, a palace that crushes its inhabitants, a shoe that pinches the foot of the wearer. He speaks to the eternal as if he were an equal, and in doing so, he breaks the first law of the silent archive. The rage of the star is a cold, white fire. She ascends back to the heights, her spirit a howling wind that demands justice for the wounded pride of the heavens. She stands before the Father of the stars and demands the bull of heaven, the cosmic drought, the creature whose breath is the famine and whose hooves are the earthquake. "Give me the leash of the bull," she cries, "or I will shatter the gates of the underworld and let the dead walk among the living. I will make the silence of the grave louder than the noise of the city." And so the leash is given, and the sky begins to crack. The bull descends upon Uruk like a falling mountain. With its first breath, the river is sucked dry, leaving the fish to gasp in the mud. With its second breath, the earth opens its mouth and swallows 300 men of the city, their cries lost in the grinding of the stone. The third breath strikes Enkidu, the child of the plains, but he is no longer a creature that fears the wild. He is the brother of the king, the one who has tasted the bread and the wine, and he meets the celestial beast with a roar that rivals the storm. He leaps upon the bull, his fingers digging into the thick, matted hair of its neck. his weight a tether that drags the celestial down to the red earth. Gilgamesh joins the fray, his great sword swinging in an arc that mimics the path of the sun. The battle is not a clash of warriors, but a struggle between the will of the species and the weight of the cosmos. The streets of Uruk become a slaughterhouse of the divine. Enkidu holds the horns, his muscles bulging like the roots of the fallen cedars, while Gilgamesh finds the space between the shoulder and the neck. He plunges the blade deep into the source of the heat. The bull of heaven collapses, its blood a dark tide that stains the white marble of the palace, its eyes turning into dull stones as the life of the heavens leaks out into the dust of the mortal city. They stand over the carcass, two figures of mud and blood, panting in the sudden, eerie silence. They have killed the guardian of the forest, and now they have slaughtered the messenger of the stars. The people of Uruk gather in the distance, their eyes wide with a terror that is stronger than their joy, for they know that the scales have been tilted too far. Enkidu, in a final act of defiance, tears the thigh from the bull and hurls it toward the heavens, toward the retreating shadow of the star. "If I could reach you," he screams into the void, "I would do to you as I have done to this beast." But as the echoes of his shout die away, the fire in his limbs begins to flicker. The victory is a heavy stone, and the weight is beginning to crush the one who was molded from the clay. The gods do not strike with lightning. They strike with the withdrawal of the breath. In the Council of the Heights, the decision is made. One of them must pay for the death of the guardian and the fall of the bull. One of them must return to the silence of the earth so that the balance can be restored. And as the moon rises over the walls of Uruk, Enkidu feels a coldness that no fire can warm, a dream that begins to weave its way through the marrow of his bones. The shadow of the wall is no longer a protection. It is a shroud. The fever begins as a whisper, a low, humming vibration in the marrow of the bone that neither the cooling waters of the river nor the shade of the cedar can silence. It is not a sickness of the flesh alone, but a withdrawal of the light that was lent to the clay. Enkidu, the one who was shaped from the silt and the silence, feels the tether between his spirit and the earth beginning to fray, strand by strand. He lies upon the couch of the city, a place of soft fabrics and scented oils that now feel like a cage of thorns compared to the open skin of the plains. His eyes, once clear as the mountain springs, are now clouded by the smoke of a world that is already beginning to burn away at the edges. He speaks to the king, but his voice is no longer a roar. It is the rustle of dry grass in a tomb. He tells of a dream, a vision that has no color and no sound, yet carries the weight of all the silence that has ever been. He saw the council of the architects, the high ones who sit upon the thrones of the stars, their faces hidden by the veil of eternity. They did not speak with words, but with the cold, geometric logic of balance. One of the two who breached the forest and slaughtered the celestial beast must return to the dust. And the lot has fallen upon the child of the wild. There is no appeal to this justice, for it is not a law written by men, but a law written in the cooling of the stars and the turning of the tides. Enkidu looks into the dark and sees the doorway that has no handle on the inside. He sees the abode of those who have ended, a place where the kings of the old world sit in the gloom, their crowns cast aside like broken pottery, their garments made of the feathers of birds that never fly. They eat the dust of the earth and drink the clay of the riverbeds, and the light they knew is replaced by a thick gray forgetting. In this vision, there is no hierarchy, no victory, and no name. There is only the slow, inevitable return of the borrowed breath to the great reservoir of the void. In his delirium, the wild man turns his heart back toward the threshold where he first lost his innocence. He curses the hunter who saw him at the waterhole. He curses the woman who brought him the touch of the human and the taste of the wine. "Why was I taken from the gazelles?" he cries, his voice breaking like a dried reed. "Why was I taught to know my own name, only to have it whispered by the wind in a place where no one listens?" He curses the gate of the city, the very timber he helped to fell, for it stands as a monument to a civilization that has no cure for the end. But the sun, the silent observer that has seen every birth and every burial, casts a golden ray across the floor of the chamber. A voice, perhaps from the heights or perhaps from the depth of his own fading memory, reminds him of what he has gained. He has tasted the bread of the many. He has worn the garments of the king. And most of all, he has known the mirror of a brother's soul. He has lived more in his few years of humanity than the stones have lived in 1,000 centuries of stillness. The curse softens. It dissolves into a blessing, a final recognition that the price of the gaze is the loss of the light. 12 days the fire burns within him, consuming the strength that once held the horns of the celestial bull. Gilgamesh, the king who believed he could conquer the world with bronze and will, stands by the bed and finds that his power is a hollow thing. He calls for the healers. He offers the wealth of the treasury to the silent heights. But the architects do not bargain with the dust they have summoned back. He watches the face of his friend, searching for a trace of the wildness that once made the earth tremble. But he finds only a sharpening of the bone and a shallow, frantic rhythm of the lungs. The final breath is not a struggle. It is a surrender. It is the sound of a bird leaving the branch, so subtle that the ear barely catches the movement. And then the silence. The silence that falls over the room is not the absence of sound, but the presence of a new, heavy reality. Enkidu is no longer a man, a brother, or a hero. He is a shape. The heat leaves the limbs. The skin takes on the gray pallor of the river's silt, and the eyes that once saw the forest through the mist are now fixed upon a horizon that Gilgamesh cannot see. The king does not weep at first, for the mind cannot immediately grasp the scale of the void. He touches the chest of his friend, waiting for the drum to beat once more. But there is only the coldness of the stone. He covers the body with a veil, as if hiding a bride. But the mystery beneath the cloth is not of life, but of the absolute end. And then the realization strikes him like a physical blow, a shattering of the internal architecture that held his world together. He begins to pace the room, his movements like those of a trapped lion. He tears the purple robes from his shoulders. He plucks the jewels from his hair and flings them into the corners of the dark. He lets his hair grow wild and his beard become matted with the dust of the floor. The city of Uruk, with its thick walls and its busy streets, becomes a ghost to him, a hive of shadows where every face he sees is merely a mask of the death that is to come. My brother, who ran with the wild things, has become the clay. He groans, the sound rising from the bottom of his soul. And shall I not also lie down like him, never to rise again? The fear of the end, which had been a distant mountain in the midst of his pride, is now the very ground beneath his feet. He no longer cares for the timber of the cedar or the gold of the tributes. He looks at his own hands, the hands that killed the guardian and the bull, and he sees the thin, invisible lines of his own decay. The king has been unmade by the mirror of the dead. He leaves the palace. He leaves the gates of the brick and the bitumen, and he steps out into the vast, unwritten wilderness, stripped of his crown and his certainty. He is no longer a king seeking a name. He is a creature seeking a way to keep the light from going out. And the path ahead is paved with the bones of those who tried before him.